There is a particular kind of tired that lives in the bones of a man who works nights. It isn't the tired you can sleep off in an afternoon. It settles deep, in the joints, in the eyes, in the slow way your hand reaches for a coffee mug it doesn't even want. That morning I sat at our little kitchen table the way I had sat 100 mornings before, still wearing the jacket that smelled of cold concrete and machine oil, steam curling up from a mug I had poured out of habit more than thirst. Said. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming, the small ticks of the walls settling, the faint birdsong starting up outside the cream curtains as the sun came up amber and soft over the rooftops. I had taken the night shift at the warehouse because the day shift didn't cover the mortgage. Not after Claire left, not with one income and a 4-year-old and a house we'd sworn we would never lose. So I worked from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, hauling pallets and reading inventory screens under fluorescent lights, counting down the hours not until my break, but until I could come home and see his face. That was the thing that kept me upright. Not the paycheck, though. God knows we needed it. It was knowing that somewhere across town, in a small bed with a glow-in-the-dark moon stuck to the ceiling, my son Eli was sleeping, safe, warm, fed, and that the roof over his head was one I had paid for with my own 2 hands, Mrs. Seban. Donnelly from next door came over every night to sleep on our couch while I worked. A kindness I could never fully repay, and every morning I came home before she woke so I could be the first thing my boy saw when he opened his eyes. That was my whole world reduced down to its smallest, hardest, most precious shape. But that morning, something in me had cracked. Maybe it was the overtime I'd picked up. 3 doubles in a row, my body running on coffee and stubbornness. Maybe it was the calendar on the wall, the one with Claire's handwriting still on it from months ago, that I hadn't had the heart to take down. I sat there and I let myself feel for just a moment how heavy it all was. How alone. I am a grown man, and I am not ashamed to tell you that I sat in my own kitchen, with the morning coming up gold around me, and I wanted just once for someone to tell me I was doing okay. I wanted someone to put a hand on my shoulder. But there was no one. There was only the mug going cold, and the quiet, and the sound of my own breathing. And in that quiet I made myself a promise, the same one I made every morning when the doubt crept in. Whatever it costs me, I told myself, that boy will never feel the absence the way I feel it. He will never sit at a table and feel alone. I would carry the loneliness for both of us if I had to. I would be the one who stayed. I drank 1 sip of the cold coffee just to feel something, and I set the mug down, and I listened to the house wake up around me, and I waited, the way a father waits, for the small sounds of small feet that would tell me the most important part of my day was about to begin. I heard him before I saw him. That soft padding sound a child makes on hardwood, the little uncertain shuffle of feet, not quite awake. I turned in my chair, and there he was standing in the hallway doorway, in those dinosaur pajamas with the worn knees, his hair sticking up on one side, silhouetted against the pale blue morning light spilling from his bedroom window behind him. Eli. 4 years old. And the entire reason my heart kept beating. He stood there, rubbing one eye with the back of his fist, the other hand braced against the doorframe, looking at me across the kitchen. The way he did every morning. Like he was checking to make sure I was real, like he half expected to wake up and find I'd vanished too. I still had my work jacket on, hadn't even gotten it off, and I must have looked a fright, gray in the face, dark circles under my eyes, but to him, I was just Daddy, home again, the way I always came home. I smiled at him, and held out my arm and said, "Good morning, buddy," the way I always did. And usually that was the moment he would come running, bare feet slapping the floor, launching himself at my legs with that fierce, total trust that small children give, without thinking. But that morning, he didn't move. He stayed in the doorway, and there was something different in his small face, something working behind his eyes that I didn't recognize. a kind of thinking that was too big for 4 years old. I felt a flicker of worry, the kind that lives permanently under a single parent's ribs. Did he have a bad dream? Was he sick? Did Mrs. Donnelly say something? I leaned forward in my chair, the old wood creaking, and I asked him gently what was wrong. Did he sleep okay? Was his tummy all right? He looked down at his own feet for a long moment, those little toes curling against the cold floor, and then he looked back up at me with those big serious eyes, and the morning light was so soft and blue around him that for one heartbreaking second he looked exactly like his mother used to look when she had something she didn't know how to say. I waited. I have learned, in the long, lonely hours of raising a child alone, that the most important thing you can do is wait and listen and not fill the silence with your own fear. So I waited. And the house held its breath with me, the curtains barely stirring, the coffee going colder, the first full light of the sun reaching across the linoleum toward his small bare feet. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He pulled at the hem of his pajama shirt, and I could see him gathering up his courage the way only a little child can, all at once. No hesitation once, he decided. I thought he was going to tell me he'd had a nightmare. I thought he was going to ask for pancakes, or to watch cartoons, or whether it was a day I had to sleep all morning, which he hated because it meant I couldn't play. I braced myself for any of the ordinary small troubles of a 4-year-old's morning. I was so tired, and I loved him so much, and I had no idea that the next words out of his mouth were going to reach into my chest and take hold of the thing I had spent every night for 6 months trying not to feel. I just looked at my boy in the doorway, the light blue and gentle around him, and I said, "What is it, Eli? You can tell me anything. Tell Daddy what's on your mind." He came to me then, finally, crossing the kitchen in those small, careful steps, and he climbed up into the chair beside me, without being asked, which he hardly ever did, because he liked to be lifted. He reached his little hand across the table and laid it flat on the wood, palm up, the way he did when he wanted me to hold it, and I covered it with mine. I will never forget how that looked. My hand is a working man's hand, big and weathered, the knuckles split from cold weather, calluses thick across the palm, from years of pallets and ropes and the handles of forklifts. And his hand was so small inside it, so smooth and warm and perfect, the fingers barely reaching past my second knuckle. The morning sun had climbed enough now to pour gold through the window over the sink, and it fell right across the table, right across our two hands, joined there, and lit them up like something in a painting. And he looked at our hands, and then he looked at me, and he said it. "Daddy, can I see Mom? I want my mom." The words landed so softly and so completely. He wasn't crying. He wasn't being difficult. He said it the way a child says a true thing, plainly from somewhere deep and honest, and that made it so much worse than if he'd screamed it. I held his little hand, and I felt the whole floor of my carefully built life tilt under me. Because here's the thing I had never told him, the thing I had been protecting him from for half a year. His mom wasn't away on a trip. His mom wasn't busy at work. His mom had decided, one rainy Tuesday in March, that this life, that we were too small for her, that she wanted something I couldn't name and couldn't give, and she had packed 2 suitcases and kissed him on the forehead while he napped, and she had gone. No forwarding address that meant anything. A few text messages at first, then fewer, then none. I had told Eli that Mummy had to go away for a while. That was the lie. I gave a 4-year-old because the truth was a weight I could not lay on those small shoulders. And every morning since, I had braced for this exact question, and every morning it had not come. And I had let myself believe maybe it never would. But children remember. Children love in ways that don't keep schedules. And there he was, holding my hand in the gold morning light, asking for the one thing in all the world I could not give him. I felt my throat close. I felt the sting behind my eyes, sharp and sudden. and I fought it down because the last thing he needed to see was his father falling apart over breakfast. I squeezed his little hand gently, and I made myself breathe. I thought of all the hours I had stood under those warehouse lights telling myself I was doing this for him, that the night shifts and the missed sleep and the loneliness were all worth it because he was safe and housed and loved. And none of it, not 1 hour of it, could answer. The simple ache in his voice. He missed his mother. Of course he did. And I realized, sitting there with the sun on our hands, that I had built my whole sacrifice around keeping the house, around keeping the roof, around the things I could control with my body and my labor. But the thing that hurt my son was a thing no amount of overtime could fix. I looked at our hands, big and small, rough and soft, and I knew that whatever I said next would matter more than any paycheck I ever brought home. I got down off the chair and onto the floor, down onto my knees in the entryway, where the morning had turned the light to that pale blue-white of an early hour, my work boots still laced tight, my jacket still smelling of the warehouse, and I brought myself down to his level, so we were eye to eye. I have learned that this matters with children. You cannot tower over them with the truth. You have to meet them where they are, small and uncertain in a world that feels enormous. I put my hands on his little shoulders, and I let my forehead rest against his, the way I used to do when he was a baby and couldn't sleep, and I felt his soft breath on my face and smelled the sleep still on him. And I said, "Buddy, I know you miss Mom. I know. It is okay to miss her. It does not make you bad, and it does not make me sad at you. You can miss her as much as you need to." He pulled his head back just enough to look at me, and he asked in that small voice, "When is she coming back?" And there it was, the question with no good answer. I had two choices in that moment, and I felt the weight of both. I could keep up the lie, tell him soon, tell him someday, keep dangling a return that I knew in my heart would not come, and watch him keep waiting, keep hoping, keep his little face turned toward the door every time it opened. Or I could find some way to tell him a truth he could carry, gently, slowly, in pieces small enough for a 4-year-old heart. I chose the truth, as much as he could hold. I said, "Eli, I don't think Mom is going to be living with us anymore. She loves you. That part is real. That part will always be real. But she had to go away, and she is not coming back to live in our house. And I'm so sorry, buddy. I am so sorry." I watched his little face try to make sense of it, his eyebrows pulling together, his mouth turning down at the corners, and I held my breath because I did not know if he would cry or get angry or simply not understand. To Tess. He looked at me for a long time. Then he asked the question that broke me and put me back together in the same breath. He said, "But you're not going to go away, are you, Daddy?" And oh, the relief and the heartbreak of it all at once. I pulled him into me, wrapped both arms around that small warm body, and I held him there in the doorway, with the blue light all around us, and my dirty work boots, and my tired bones, and I said into his hair, "No, no, buddy. I'm not going anywhere. Not ever. I'm going to be right here every single morning when you wake up. I promise you that. I promise." And I meant it with everything I had, with the whole ruined, exhausted core of me. I felt him relax against me, his little arms coming up around my neck, his weight sinking into mine, the way a child relaxes only when they finally feel safe. We stayed like that for a long while, kneeling in the entryway, the morning getting brighter around us, and I rocked him slightly the way I had when he was tiny. I realized then that he had not really been asking for his mother to come back. He had been asking whether the ground under his feet was solid. He had been asking whether the one person left would stay. And in answering him, I answered the question I had been carrying in my own chest. All those long warehouse nights, I would stay. That was the whole of it. That was everything. I would be the dad who stayed. When we finally got up off the floor, my knees aching and his eyes a little less worried, I carried him into the kitchen and set him down by the refrigerator, and that was when I saw it again, really saw it, the drawing he had made the week before. It was taped there at his height, a little crooked, the corner already curling. A child's crayon drawing on a sheet of paper that had gone soft from being handled so much. Two stick figures, a big one and a small one, holding hands, both with enormous, round, smiling faces and wild, scribbled hair. He had used the brown crayon for the big figure, worn down almost to a nub from how hard he pressed, and the orange for the little one. Above them he had drawn a yellow sun with rays going out in every direction, and below them a green line that was the grass, and that was the whole picture. Just a man and a child holding hands under a sun. The warm kitchen light fell across it and lit up the cream-colored fridge behind it, and I stood there looking at that drawing, and I felt something shift in me, because there was no third figure. There was no mother in the picture. I had worried, when he made it, that the absence meant he was grieving, that he had drawn out his own loss. But standing there now, I saw it differently. He hadn't drawn who was missing. He had drawn who was there. He had drawn the two of us together, in the sunshine, holding hands. To him, this was not a picture of what he had lost. It was a picture of his whole world, complete. A father and a son. I asked him about it. Gently, I said, "Tell me about your picture, buddy. Who is this?" And he pointed at the big brown figure with his small finger and said, "That's you, Daddy." And pointed at the orange one and said, "And that's me." And we're holding hands. And I asked, "Where are we going?" And he thought about it very seriously, the way he thinks about important things. And he said to the park, "But it doesn't matter where, because we're together." I had to turn away for a second and pretend I was getting something from the cupboard, because a man can only hold so much in one morning. Here I had been killing myself with worry that I wasn't enough, that one parent couldn't possibly fill the space left by two, that my boy was suffering some great wound I couldn't heal. And he had taped his answer to the refrigerator weeks ago. We're together. That was enough for him. The simple presence of me, my hand around his hand, was the entire architecture of his security. I thought about all the fathers out there carrying this same secret fear, lying awake or driving home from night shifts, wondering if they're doing right by their kids, measuring themselves against some impossible standard of the family that was supposed to be. And I wanted to tell every one of them what that crayon drawing told me. Your child is not keeping a ledger of who is absent. Your child is counting on who shows up. They draw the hand that holds theirs. I looked back at the picture, at the wobbly brown stick figure that was supposed to be me, this exhausted man in work clothes who didn't feel like much of a hero. And I saw myself the way my son saw me, big, steady, there, holding on. I reached out and pressed the curling corner of the paper back flat against the fridge, smoothing it down with my calloused thumb, and I decided right then that drawing was never coming down. It could fade and curl and yellow with age, and I would never take it down, because it was the truest thing in that whole house. It was a 4-year-old's gospel. We're together, and it doesn't matter where, because we're together. After breakfast, he got sleepy again, the way little ones do after a big feeling, and I carried him back to his room and laid him down on top of his covers, and he was asleep before I'd even pulled the blanket over him, one arm flung up over his head, his cheek squashed against the pillow, his breathing gone slow and deep. I sat down on the edge of his bed, the mattress dipping under my weight, and I rested my hand on his small back, feeling it rise and fall, that steady miracle of a sleeping child. The room was washed in amber now, the sun fully up, gold light coming through the gap in his curtains and falling across the little plastic dinosaurs lined up on his shelf, the books we read every night stacked on his nightstand, the moon sticker on the ceiling that didn't glow at all in the daylight. And I sat there, and I let myself feel it all, the love and the grief tangled up together, the way they always are, because that is the truth of it that nobody warns you about. You can love being a father with your entire soul and still grieve, in the quiet hours, the life you thought you'd have. I had pictured this differently once. Claire and me, the three of us, mornings full of noise and toast crumbs, and two voices reading the bedtime story, I had not pictured night shifts and a couch-borrowed neighbor and a boy asking for a mother who chose to leave. I let myself feel the loss of all that, sitting on his bed with my hand on his back, and I did not fight it this time. I think you have to let yourself grieve a little, in private, so that you do not let it bleed into the time you spend with him. I grieved the marriage. I grieved the version of myself I'd been before, the one who slept 8 hours and worked days, and didn't carry the whole weight of a child's world alone. And then, the way it always does when I let it run its course, the grief thinned out, and underneath it was the love, solid as bedrock. I looked at my sleeping son and I thought, you were worth all of it. Every cold night under those warehouse lights, every hour of missing sleep, every lonely morning at that kitchen table. You. I thought about how he had asked if I was going to leave too, and how that question must have been living in his small chest for who knows how long, and it humbled me. He had been carrying his own fear all this time, just as I had been carrying mine, and neither of us had known the other's burden. That is what it is to be a single parent. You and this small person, alone together against the bigness of the world, each one trying to be brave for the other. I leaned down and I kissed the back of his head, his hair soft against my lips, and I breathed him in, that warm, sleepy smell of a child. I whispered to him, even though he couldn't hear me. I said, I've got you, buddy. I've got us. You sleep. Daddy's not going anywhere. And I stayed there a long while, longer than I should have given. How tired I was, just sitting with my hand on his back and the amber light filling the room, learning the rhythm of his breathing all over again, letting it slow my own racing heart. I realized that for 6 months, I had been so focused on keeping the house, on the boots and the bills and the borrowed couch, that I had nearly forgotten this, the simple holy act of sitting beside your sleeping child and being, for that one quiet moment, exactly where you are supposed to be. Nothing else mattered, not the overtime, not the cold coffee, not the woman who left, just this. Just him, breathing, safe, and me beside him, staying. I finally made myself get up, my body screaming for sleep, and I walked back out toward the front of the house. And there, in the entryway, where the morning light had turned to honey across the scuffed old floorboards, I stopped and looked down at the 2 pairs of shoes by the door. My work, boots, steel-toed and enormous, scarred and scuffed from years of hard use, the leather cracked across the toes, the laces frayed at the ends, a thin crust of warehouse dust still on them. And right beside them, lined up neat the way Eli liked them, his tiny sneakers, light-up ones with cartoon characters on the sides, so small they could fit in the palm of my hand, the Velcro straps worn fuzzy from him pulling them open and closed 100 times a day. And I stood there in the honey-colored light, and I could not stop looking at those 2 pairs of shoes side by side, the big and the small, the worn and the new, the shoes that went out into the dark every night to earn the roof, and the little shoes that ran around safe underneath that roof all day. There was a whole story in those 2 pairs of shoes, our whole life together written in leather and Velcro and the scuff marks on a wooden floor. I thought about the journey those boots had walked, the miles of warehouse concrete, the cold parking lot at 2 in the morning, the drive home with the heater barely working and my eyes heavy. And I thought about where his little sneakers had been, to the park, like in his drawing, to the playground where I pushed him on the swings on my days off until my arms ached and he begged for hire, to the grocery store where he rode in the cart and named every fruit. 2 pairs of shoes that walked 2 completely different roads, and yet they ended up here side by the same front door at the end of the night and the start of the day. I crouched down and I picked up one of his little sneakers and just held it for a moment, this absurdly small thing, and I felt the weight of what it means to be the one who provides. People talk about providing as if it is only about money, about keeping the lights on and the fridge full, and it is that, But it is also this. It is the willingness to put on the heavy boots and walk out into the dark so that the little shoes never have to. It is carrying the hard road so they can have the soft one. I set his sneaker back down beside its mate, lined up neat the way he liked, and I looked at my own boots, and for the first time in a long while, I did not see them as a symbol of how tired I was. I saw them as a symbol of what I was willing to do. These boots had kept us in this house. These boots had walked the floors that paid for those little sneakers, and the food in his belly, and the crayons he drew us with. There is a dignity in worn-out shoes by a door, a dignity that does not announce itself, that just sits quietly in the honey light asking nothing. I thought about how he would grow, how those little sneakers would be replaced by bigger ones, and then bigger still, until one day his shoes would be as large as mine, maybe larger, and he would walk out his own front doors into his own dark mornings. And I hoped, standing there, that he would remember this. That when he was a man with worn shoes by his own door, he would remember that his father's boots had stood beside his little sneakers every single morning without fail. That the dad had stayed. That was the only legacy I wanted to leave him. Not money, not things, just the certain knowledge woven into his bones that someone had always come home. I went back into the kitchen to finally pour out that cold coffee and maybe make a fresh cup before I crashed. And I ended up just standing there at the window, over the sink, the mug held in both hands, looking out at the pre-dawn blue that was lifting now into the soft colors of full morning. I could see my own reflection faintly in the glass, overlaid on the backyard, a ghost of a tired man hovering over the grass and the fence and the old swing set. I looked at that reflection for a while. I didn't recognize him at first, honestly. There were lines on that face that hadn't been there a year ago. Gray coming in at the temples that I was too young for, eyes that had seen too many sunrises from the wrong side of a night shift. But the longer I looked, the more I saw something else in that reflection too. Something underneath the exhaustion. I saw a man who had not run. A man who, when the bottom fell out of his life, when his wife walked out and left him holding everything, had not crumbled, and had not fled, and had not handed his son off to be raised by someone else. He had picked up the heavy boots and gone to work. He had borrowed a neighbor's kindness and come home every single morning. He had knelt down on the entryway floor and told the 4-year-old the truth as gently as he knew how. That man in the glass was not much to look at, but he was still standing, and standing was not nothing. Standing was, in fact, everything. I sipped the cold bitter coffee, and I let myself for once feel something other than tired. I let myself feel proud. It is a strange thing to be proud of, just staying, just not leaving. The world doesn't give out medals for it. There are no ceremonies for the fathers who come home. No headlines for the men who simply keep showing up morning after morning after morning. Half the world wouldn't even count it as remarkable. But I have come to believe it is one of the most remarkable things a person can do. To stay when staying is hard. To stay when you are exhausted and lonely and afraid. To stay when the easy thing, the thing the other parent chose, was to go. I thought about Claire, then out there somewhere, living whatever life she'd left us for, and I found that the anger I'd carried for months had thinned out into something quieter, almost like pity, because she would never know this. She would never know what it felt like to have your son ask if you were going to leave, and to be able to say, no, never, and mean it. She would never feel his little arms around your neck loosen with relief. She had traded all of that away for whatever she thought she was missing, and I would not have traded it for the world. The morning kept getting brighter, the pre-dawn blue giving way to gold, and my reflection grew fainter in the glass as the light came up behind the trees. I watched the backyard come into color, the dewy grass, the rusted swing set I kept meaning to fix, and I made myself a quiet vow standing there at that window. I vowed that I would stop measuring my worth by what I had lost. I would stop standing in the wreckage of the family that fell apart, and start standing in the strength of the family that held. Eli and me, a father and a son and a crayon drawing on the fridge. It was not the life I'd planned, but standing at that window in the rising light, with my son safe and sleeping down the hall, I understood for the first time that it was a good life, a whole life, and I had built it against everything with my own 2 hands. Eli woke up an hour later, refreshed the way only small children can be, and he came and found me, and somehow, without either of us saying much, we ended up out on the back porch step, sitting together in the pale gold of the full morning. I had pulled on a sweatshirt over my work shirt, and he was still in his dinosaur pajamas with a blanket around his shoulders, and we just sat there, side by side on the cool wooden step, looking out at the quiet backyard. The grass was still wet with dew, and it sparkled where the sun hit it. A bird was working at something in the grass. The neighbor's wind chime made a soft sound now and then. And after a while, without a word, Eli leaned over and put his head against my arm, the whole weight of his little head resting there, his soft hair against my sleeve, and he let out a long, contented breath. We didn't talk for a long time. We didn't need to. There is a kind of closeness that doesn't require words, and I think it is the deepest kind there is. Just 2 people who belong to each other, sitting in the morning, watching the world wake up. I put my arm around him and pulled him in a little closer, and he snuggled into my side, and I felt the warmth of him soaking through my sleeve. And I thought about how that morning had started with him in the doorway asking for his mum, and how far we had traveled in just a few hours, all the way to this easy, quiet peace on a porch step. The question that had broken my heart at the kitchen table had not destroyed us. It had opened a door. By telling him the truth, by promising him I would stay, I had given him something solid to lean on. And here he was, literally leaning on me, the metaphor and the reality folded into one. After a while he spoke, his voice small and thoughtful. In the quiet he said, "Daddy, can we get a dog?" And I laughed, really laughed, the sound surprising me, because it was so perfectly, wonderfully ordinary, so completely the question of a child who feels safe enough to want ordinary things again. I said, "We'll see, buddy, maybe someday." And he nodded against my arm, as if that was a fair answer, and we went back to watching the yard. I realized that this was what healing looked like, not some grand dramatic moment. Just a child who had asked for his missing mother in the morning and was asking for a dog by breakfast because the ground under him had been made solid again, because he knew now deep down that the most important person was not going anywhere. Children are resilient in a way that humbles me. They grieve, and they hope, and they ask for dogs, all in the same morning, and they teach us that life goes on, that love is not a finite thing that runs out when one person leaves, but a renewable thing that grows wherever it is tended. I sat on that step with my son's head on my arm and the gold light all around us, and I thought, this is the whole point, not the house, though. I had fought so hard to keep it, not the job, though it kept us fed. The point was this: a man and a boy on a porch step, leaning into each other, watching a quiet morning, in no hurry to be anywhere else. The point was that I had stayed, and because I had stayed, he was here, leaning on me, safe enough to dream about dogs. I would have worked 1,000 more night shifts for that. 10,000. There's no amount of tired that could ever outweigh the feeling of a child's head resting trustingly against your arm in the morning sun. Eventually he ran off to play, the way children do, the heaviness of the morning forgotten in the bright simplicity of the day, and I went back inside to clean up before I finally let myself sleep. And the kitchen, in the long golden light of mid-morning, held the quiet evidence of everything that had happened. His empty cereal bowl sat on the counter, a little milk pooled at the bottom, the spoon resting across the rim where he'd left it. And beside it, where I had set it down, my folded work uniform, the shirt with my name stitched over the pocket. the heavy fabric still carrying the faint smell of the warehouse. The morning sun stretched long and warm across the counter, touching both of those things, the bowl and the uniform, the small life I fed, and the labor that fed it side by side in the light. I stood there and looked at them for a long moment, and it struck me as the perfect picture of who we were. The empty bowl meant he was full, that he had eaten, that he was cared for. The folded uniform meant the night was over, that the work was done, that I had made it home again. Between those two objects, on the counter, lay the whole quiet exchange of my life. A night shift ending, and a day of fatherhood beginning. The two halves of me, the worker and the dad, meeting there in the morning light, handing off to each other, the way they did every single day. I picked up the bowl and rinsed it in the sink, and I picked up my uniform and set it aside to wash. Ordinary chores, the small endless tasks of keeping a home. And I thought about all the parents who would watch the sun come up the way I had, tired, beyond words, wondering if any of it mattered, wondering if they were enough. If you are one of them, I want you to hear this the way I needed someone to tell me at that kitchen table at the start of the day. It matters. You are enough. The child does not need you to be perfect or rich or two parents in one. The child needs you to come home. The child needs the bowl to be full and the door to open in the morning and the hand to hold theirs under the crayon sun. That is the whole job, and it is the hardest and most important job there is. And if you are doing it, if you are staying, then you are already a hero, whether or not anyone ever tells you so. My boy asked for his mom this morning, and it nearly took me apart. But by the end of that morning, he had leaned his head on my arm and asked for a dog. And that is the truth of what staying does. It does not erase the loss. Nothing can do that. But it builds something new and solid on top of it, day by day, bowl by bowl, morning by morning, until the child stops looking at the door for the one who left and starts trusting the one who stayed. I looked one last time at the empty bowl drying in the rack and my uniform waiting to be washed, the gold light moving slowly across the counter as the morning turned toward noon, and then I went down the hall to finally sleep, because tonight there would be another shift and tomorrow another morning, and I would be there for it. I would always be there for it. I am the dad who stayed, and if you are too, then know that somewhere a man you have never met is proud of you, and that the small empty bowl on your counter is the truest medal you will ever earn. Go get some rest. Your child will be looking for your face in the morning. Make sure you are there to see it.